Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Pretty good. And we today are talking about players who did really great in their early part of their career, but for whatever reason, things kind of fell off, and they looked like they were on the track of being in the all-time greats by age 25 or in their first 5 seasons, but didn't quite get there, and we're going to explore some of the reasons what happened. We're going to explore some of the all-time greats and explore what percentage of their career value they attained early on in their career, and just kind of explore that topic a little bit. Kind of got a few different ways of doing that.
Yeah, so obviously with the current NBA, and it's been really this way for quite a number of years, is, younger players are playing much better, in their first few years, the first 5 years before age 25, obviously coming in after one college season, they're starting, with a little bit of a head start. They get a few more years, but we see historically too that there were a lot of guys, even your all-time legends, were great before age 25. And that's sort of a fun exploration, is to look then at the guys that maybe didn't turn out great. And in some of these cases, some of these guys are Hall of Famers. So when we say great, it's still kind of relative in the sense that, a few of the guys that we're going to say are definitely Hall of Famers, and no doubt Hall of Famers. But when we talk about all-time greatness, you look at here, and just kind of a quick snapshot to give people an idea, for players under 25, so this is 25 years old and under, here's the win share ranks. So these are players 25 and under, the all-time ranks in win shares. Number 1 is LeBron James with 103. I believe he's on a pretty good trajectory to be pretty good overall all-time. Kevin Durant is number 2. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is number 3. Dwight Howard's number 4. We'll talk about him here in a little bit, because he might be one that's a pretty interesting case. Then you got Chris Paul, Julius Erving, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tracy McGrady. We're talking, and McGrady's the guy we're going to bring up a little bit here. But you're talking about LeBron, Durant, Kareem, Chris Paul, Julius Erving, Michael Jordan, Kobe, these are all-time guys here. And that's something that's definitely, and then you go to the rest of the top 20, you got Moses Malone, Artis Gilmore, Shaq, Oscar Robertson, Tim Duncan, Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley. So it's not a new phenomenon that players are doing well, before their age 25. But you look at that list, and it's a lot of the guys that are good before age 25 are all-time legends and stay good. But there are some guys who have some big fallout points, and we're going to talk about that a little bit and sort of explore those guys and look at maybe what happened in their career and why they didn't achieve what I would consider all-time greatness, or what we would consider, sort of that all-time greatness.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're looking at guys, if we're using the age 25 cutoff, obviously the guys who, in the last 20 years who came out of high school or only had 1 year of college are going to have more years to accumulate this. So, but it's so interesting to, there's exceptions to that, and looking at the numbers themselves, LeBron has 103. Number 2, Durant has 89. So there's a huge disparity there. Kareem's the only other guy above 80, and then you have this, block of guys who are in the 70s from, Howard, Paul, Irving, Kobe, Jordan, McGrady, who are all in the 70s, and then you have, a bunch of guys who are in the 60s that you listed before. So, it's worth noting how much, LeBron is above everybody, and then Durant and Kareem are above everybody, and then there's, a cluster of guys in the 70s.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, too. So our first guy that we're kind of digging into is Easy Ed Macauley, who was best known for being part of the early Celtics, pre-Bill Russell Celtics. In fact, he was traded for Bill Russell. We'll get to that in a moment. But he was actually a territorial pick in the 1949 BAA draft. And that also included Vern Mickelson, who went to the Lakers and was part of their big dynasty. Also, really 3 Hall of Famers from that draft, Macauley, Mickelson, and Dick McGuire. It was the final BAA draft until the league merged with the NBL to become the NBA. So he actually started off with the St. Louis Bombers. He was from St. Louis, and but then went on to fame with the Celtics from 50 to 56, was drafted by the Celtics from the Bombers in one of the many dispersal drafts of the early 50s, because teams were, disbanding left and right during that time. And he led the league in field goal percentage twice, averaged 19 points per game, 8.6 rebounds per game through age 25. This was during a time, pre-shot clock, where the pace was slowed, so those are strong numbers for that time.
19 is great. 19 is elite level scoring at this time. So that's just to give you context. Yeah, that's a big deal. 19 points a game.
Exactly. So, and he set an NBA record for shooting percentage, 48.6 from the field, also very good for the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So. and had the ninth most win shares by age 25. 69.4 and ended with 100.4. Was still very good for like another 4 seasons. Kind of fell off in his last season before retiring. Part of this is just he had a short career. And guys in the 50s, with very, very few exceptions, played about 9-10 years, and that was it. So, obviously you're not going to be able to accumulate a lot if you don't play that long.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely an issue with Macauley, and his stats, like we said, like the first 4 years after that big peak that he had up to age 25, still solid years, but by the 5th year you could tell it was kind of done, and then you do wonder that even if he did play 4 or 5 more years, how much he would have actually accumulated. But like you said, it's sort of the way that the game was played that time, and the way the players sort of aged at that point. It was like you played 9-10 years, your body was kind of done, and then you went and you did something else. You either coached or you went to some sort of management role, or you just stop playing basketball because it was, hey, you're done with pro basketball and you're done. But yeah, obviously with modern medicine and modern health and modern, athletic training or whatever, guys are obviously lasting a lot longer. But yeah, Macaulay's a great example of a guy who, peaks high and then, by his 30s is pretty much done in the league, which is not uncommon at that time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The travel was harder. The guys were not taking care of their bodies, all that good stuff. So he, as we mentioned, was traded for Bill Russell, very famously, to the Hawks, who at this point were in St. Louis. So he got back to St. Louis. I believe he had his son was not in or son or daughter was not in the best of health. So there was some personal reasons to go back to St. Louis. So he's happy to do so. And then he helped lead the Hawks to 57 finals. They lost to the Celtics, but they actually won in 58, beating the Celtics 4-2. They're the franchise's only championship. Although by then he was more of a role player, averaging 5.8 points per game, 6.3 rebounds per game in those finals. By then, it was Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan's team. Cliff Hagan also part of that trade with the Celtics, another Hall of Famer. For the decade of the 50s, despite being a center, he had the 8th most assists of all NBA players, and he's 12th all time among centers in assists per game. So that's a really strong mark. And his reputation was that he was a really good offensive player, but just was not not a very good defensive player, not really big enough to defend the big guys who were in the league at that point. He was quick and agile, and he was actually more of a forward sized player even at that time, but played kind of an undersized center, and at a certain point was effective because those, even pre-championship, those teams with the Celtics were pretty good, but they always kind of had trouble in the playoffs because they lacked the really awesome big man, and obviously once they get Bill Russell, that was not a problem.
Right, yeah. Once you cannot shoot around the rim because Bill Russell's blocking you, it certainly helps you win a lot more games.
It is pretty good, yeah. So, and then he did briefly coach the Hawks, as many people coached the Hawks during that time. And then actually, it led them to the finals. It led them to the finals in 1960. They lost in Game 7 to the Celtics in the finals. He even admitted later, I wasn't really much of a coach, but whatever. The fact that they got to Game 7 was a pretty good, and I think he was there for about a year and a half, so that's a pretty good that's a pretty good run for St. Louis Hawks coach.
No, not bad at all. Yeah. And I mean, he's kind of a tough one. Like, I felt bad including him because there's a few different reasons, why he's, I think, so obviously on this list is the era he plays in. Does not play late into his 30s, but he's still a no doubt Hall of Famer and no doubt, had a great all time player, but maybe not the greatness. I mean, we're talking about top 10 all time in terms of win shares by age 25. And even in his era, that stands out. I mean, we've talked and we listed the guys, and a lot of the other guys we listed were your 80s guys, your 90s guys, even your current guys. Macauley kind of stands out there. It's like, wow, he really was head and shoulders above almost everybody else by age 25. But then all time, when you look at it, I don't think Ed Macauley is the first name that comes up when you talk about, the great players of the 50s and 60s or whatever. He's not one of those guys. Yeah.
He's on the second team of that list, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. And by age 25, he wasn't. I mean, he was maybe arguably one of the best, but he just kind of falls off after that point.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe the best way to think of this is, like, we're talking about guys who, by age 25 or in their first 5 seasons were on track to be, maybe top 10, top 15 players of all time. And then, and some of these guys here, might be top 50, but might not be top 50. You'd probably top 100. But that's that's kind of I think a good way to. And a couple of the guys you're talking about, completely fell off and aren't even anywhere near there. So I think that's a pretty good way to think of kind of this crop of guys who are like, oh yeah, they're still Hall of Famers, they're still really good, but they just for whatever reason didn't quite reach they're not top 10, not top 15 players of all time for sure.
So next guy we're talking about is Dwight Howard, and he's interesting, and he's going to be a guy, and I'm curious, Jason, just kind of a quick aside. There's a lot of weirdness about how we sort of react to Dwight Howard these days, how people, in the modern NBA landscape and how we sort of think of Dwight Howard all the time, because you'll see a lot of arguments where people are like, oh, I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer and all that sort of stuff, and it's like, man, this guy was fucking great for a long, long, long time, and it's just like, I think he's going to be a guy, I feel like, because he's weird, he's annoying, everybody hates him, you know what I mean? Coaches hate him, players hate him, he's just kind of a dork, he's weird, he's annoying or whatever, but he's the guy that maybe after he retires and then like 10 years past, people, do you think then will maybe appreciate him a little bit more because it'll be out of the context of what he was like when he was playing or actively playing? I don't know, because I feel like there's just a lot of stupidity around his legacy and his career.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think part of it is that like he declined as a player relatively early because of the back injuries and and that kind of stuff. And he still puts up good numbers, but I don't think the impact is there anymore. He just
right. They're very empty. They're very empty double-doubles.
Yeah, I mean, that's still that's still impressive, but it's not leading. It's not conducive to winning basketball anymore. Really, and given kind of the volume, he's still trying to put up shots and post ups and all that stuff, and you just can't defend like he could in his prime. He was absolutely an amazing player in his prime. I don't know. I think people are going to say that it was a weak era for centers. I mean, he's a no doubt Hall of Famer. He might not be first ballot because the Hall of Fame can be kind of weird, but I mean, he's definitely going to be in there. I think I find it hard to believe that there's going to be like some sort of renaissance of like the people who dislike him now. I'm not sure they're going to. I guess there's like people who dislike him because of his personality, and there's people who think he wasn't like a Hall of Famer. And right.
Yeah. I think there's two different camps there. There's like, and I'm definitely in the like does not enjoy Dwight Howard as a person,
right, or
camp
as a player,
or whatever, but appreciate what he was able to do in his prime and appreciate how good he was for a handful of years that we're going to talk about here in a sec. So yeah, I think there is those two different camps, and I'd be curious to see where they sort of are in 10 years or whatever.
Right. I mean, yeah, I don't know if there's going to be like a whole lot of minds that change during that time, unless there's maybe some studies on like maybe there's some ways of being able to see like the deeper impact that he had on those Magic teams, and maybe those 8 years or so can be evaluated with maybe better stats or maybe better video study or whatever to kind of show like, oh yeah, this guy was like one of the great defensive forces in NBA history for a good period of time. Maybe that's it. I mean, he did win like 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, so yeah right. I mean, he's certainly been honored quite a bit, but I don't see it changing massively, but it's not impossible, I guess.
Well, let's get into a little bit of him, because obviously Best Bets age 25. He is a great example of this. First overall pick in the 2004 draft. It was not a very great draft. The All-Stars of the 2004 draft are Devin Harris, who when the hell did Devin Harris make an All-Star team? And how many people had to get hurt before Devin Harris was selected to the All-Star?
It was early on.
People did not want to show up to whatever city it was to get.
Was it that year that they won like 67 games and had I'm assuming it was around then when the Mavericks were just winning crazy amounts of regular season games.
Yeah, I don't know. I should look to see what year it was, but it's pretty wild there. Luol Deng is also a All-Star from this draft. Andre Iguodala, Jameer Nelson. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's, wow.
Yeah.
Great. So you got Devin Harris and Jameer Nelson, who okay. Right. And then Luol Deng, who made 2 All-Star games. And I guess, Luol had some fun stuff. We'll talk about him a little bit more. And then Andre Iguodala had a few good years, but that's not a wonderful draft there.
I mean, Dwight's the only Hall of Famer there for sure. Maybe Iguodala, if depending on, the rest of his career with the Warriors, maybe I could see that possibly being in. But yeah, I mean, Dwight's the only no doubt great player there. So.
Maybe Devin Harris gets a renaissance in Denver, and we talk about the great Devin Harris.
Sure.
Best after age 35, the Devin Harris run in Denver.
And Jameer on the Pistons, obviously, too.
Of course, yes, Jameer, forget. Yeah. But Howard, he made an immediate impact on the Orlando Magic. He finished his rookie year with averages of 12 points per game, 10 rebounds per game. He's the youngest player in NBA history to average a double-double in the regular season. He also became the youngest player in NBA history to average at least 10 rebounds in a season, and the youngest NBA player ever to record at least 20 rebounds in a game. Of course, he comes in out of high school, so he's got a lot of these early, and unlike a lot of other high school players, I mean, even to an extent LeBron James, like Dwight Howard, really from the beginning, I mean, there was some stuff that obviously his body had to kind of come into form or whatever, but he was a guy who made an immediate impact in terms of what you wanted out of him. It was get rebounds and score around the rim, and that's what he did his rookie year quite well. And seeing to be able to hold up to the physicality of the game as well, which is always an issue with big men coming out from high school or whatever. We've seen issues with guys like Eddie Curry or whatever. Even Kevin Garnett, for an extent, had a little bit of a time trying to figure out sort of the physicality and figure out how to sort of have his body hold up to the rigors. But Dwight Howard, other than being a little skinny at that point, was able to sort of do it pretty well and accumulate a lot of these great numbers. He was also the first player in NBA history directly out of high school to start all 82 games in his regular season as well, or his rookie season, I should say as well. November 2005, Howard scores 21 points and 20 rebounds. He becomes the youngest player ever to score 20 or more points and gather 20 or more rebounds in the same game. In April of 2009, he becomes the youngest player ever to win the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year award. That was a goal that he had set for himself at the beginning of the year, so kind of cool to see him do that. He led to the Magic to the NBA Finals in only his 5th season, which is pretty cool there. And now as far as the win shares, and we mentioned him a little bit earlier, 79.8 win shares. That's the 4th most by age 25 for Dwight Howard. And then 47.7 win shares in the 7 seasons since. Obviously, he's still accumulating those. So obviously, you see in the first by age 25, are we talking about a guy that's just killing it? He's, as we mentioned, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then Dwight Howard. And it's like 3 of those names are, there's that upper echelon, and then there's Dwight Howard there. But it's pretty remarkable. By age 25, he had been a 5-time All-Star. He had led the league in field goal percentage, rebounds 3 times, blocks twice, 4 consecutive years at top NBA's defensive win shares, once in defensive box plus minus. I mean, he was an all-around superstar. He won the slam dunk contest. He was endorsing stuff. It was all about it. Then obviously the back goes, he bounces around between teams, and it's kind of the Dwight Howard we have now where, it's not quite sure. But this is a guy who, again, top 5 all time in terms of win shares by age 25. And now it's like there's legitimate debates about whether or not he belongs in a Hall of Fame or whatever. So it's pretty interesting to see sort of how his career and trajectory that has gone. But that's pretty remarkable to be, with LeBron, Durant, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar over your first, by age 25. But that's kind of the story of Dwight Howard there.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them legitimate debates. I mean, he's definitely Hall of Famer, but
for sure.
People make those debates. That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, he was really. I think one thing also, he's obviously a massive human being, but he's not. He's not 7'1". He's 6'10". Like he was. Doing all that rim protection and, having that defensive impact, not just protecting the rim, but also all over the court, as a guy who was smaller than a lot of the centers that he was competing against, I think there's something that's really impressive about the fact that he was able to do that. Obviously, he was, especially a couple years in, he was really muscular. He had an awesome body. I mean, he had physical gifts, but he wasn't necessarily, the biggest guy out there. He was competing against some really big guys and able to, defend them well. So I think that's something about him as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and super athletic as well. I mean, really, that's going to be one of the things I think that's going to, when we go back and look at kind of the history of, Dwight Howard, and you look at what he was able to do, just seeing how freak of an athlete he was. I mean, he could just jump. So, I mean, and big men, obviously, they obviously, of course, have an advantage in the court for being taller or whatever, but he's a guy who he would have his mouth at the rim a lot of times going on stuff. So, and that helped a lot with rebounds, as you said, where he was a little bit younger, and obviously he had a physical gift in terms of muscularity. He was able to be bigger than a lot of the guys and sort of help, but he also had great positioning as well. Great rim protector, one of the early sort of now it's sort of obvious that your big man stays by the rim and just swats everything away or whatever. But there was a while there where that was sort of something that you didn't see all that much, or there weren't guys that were just specialists in that sort of way. And Dwight was one of those guys who, no matter what, he would just collapse in and swat everything away. Anything that came near the rim or whatever was a great defender, as you said, defensive player of the year multiple times, led the league in defensive win shares, but really sort of stood out defensively, as well as getting all the rebounds and being a pretty good scorer as well. There was always issues about him refining his offensive game in terms of what he was able to do doing the post. And, he always wanted to be more of like kind of a back to the basket post guy when he was actually a lot better at just doing, pick and roll and sort of driving from there. But one way or another, I mean, it didn't matter because he was putting up huge numbers for his first few years. And still, like you said, putting up okay numbers these days, but they seem a little empty and hollow now.
Yeah.
Given that, he's bouncing around so much and the teams that he's at don't have the same success that they had when he was in Orlando.
Yeah, at his peak, the offense wasn't pretty, but it was effective. I mean, you could see like, aesthetically, like, if you just kind of learned some moves, maybe it would be better, but it would definitely be more fun to watch. But it was working. So, although maybe if he'd learned some of that, maybe he'd be a little more effective these days with the athleticism waning. But you never know. So. Next we got Tracy McGrady, who was 9th overall, selected by the Raptors in the 97 draft, also came out of high school. We had Tim Duncan at number 1, Chauncey Billups at number 2, and not really a strong draft after that. We have Keith Van Horn, Antonio Daniels, Tony Battie in the top 5. We also have Ron Mercer, Tim Thomas, Adana Foyle, and Danny Fortson in the top 10. And McGrady, as a rookie, struggled a little bit under a head coach, Darrell Walker. We're touching on this a bit in our 20 years ago series on the 97-98 season, where he was benched at times. There was some a concern about like that, he wasn't playing through injury, stuff like that. So, but once Darrell Walker resigned, Butch Carter took over, and then T-Mac started to flourish. The next year, Toronto drafted Vince Carter, who's McGrady's cousin. D. Brown once said, they say they're cousins, but Siamese twins is more like it. So McGrady, after a couple years with the Raptors, eventually became a free agent and signed a 6-year, $67.5 million contract with Orlando. This was during a time where the rookie contracts were overhauled to have longer team control, but at this point it was only 3 years, I believe. And then the idea was that McGrady would and Grant Hill, who's other free agent target, would play together and be awesome. But unfortunately, Grant Hill did not play very much during his tenure in Orlando. He was constantly injured, so it was really McGrady who was able to who was leading the team, and he flourished personally. But unfortunately for the Magic, they largely did not. They never won a playoff series and missed the playoffs altogether several years. McGrady won NBA Most Improved Player of the Year, and then in 2003 had just one of the all-time great seasons, won the scoring title with 32 points per game, 6.5 rebounds per game, and 5.5 assists per game. Actually only finished 4th in MVP voting, but really was, arguably should have been MVP that year, or at least maybe second to Duncan. One other scoring title the next year, then eventually was traded to Houston in the offseason after things kind of soured in Orlando, and his playing was fine, but more I think personality conflicts there. And then they kind of made way for Dwight Howard, actually, was the ironic thing there. But had 72 win shares by age 25 in 2005. But then over the next 7 seasons, only had 25.2 as he battled injuries. Was in 5 All-Star games by the time he was 25. And as we talked about the 2003 season, he led the league in box plus minus, win shares for 48, offensive win shares, and it just had an awesome PER. So all of those numbers, like I said, it's one of the great, particularly offensive seasons in NBA history.
Yeah, and Tim Duncan, who won the MVP that year, had a solid year as well. He was at 23.3 points per game, 12.9 rebounds per game, and obviously had some team success along the way as well. But, I mean, that T-Mac year is one of the, and I'm obviously a noted T-Mac hater, but that's a year that you just had. I mean, it's an unbelievable one on a lot of levels. And I think, I forget the exact website, but if you look for it, there is a study on how it is like legitimately one of the greatest seasons of all time that we've ever seen in the NBA, because it was just absolute domination and a guy who, really took a team that was doing nothing and got them to a place that they would have never ever been without one individual just really stepping it up and being just an all-time great. And that year is incredible. But yeah, of course the injuries came into issue, a lot of back injuries, and it really slowed him down, and to a certain extent he just couldn't stay healthy, couldn't stay on the court. Obviously the relationship in Houston with Yao Ming had some highs, and obviously the lows were the health. Neither guy could really stay healthy to make any long sort of playoff runs. And then there's the other T-Mac years that we won't talk about, the Spurs, the Knicks, and all that other weird stuff. I think there's another team. The Pistons, right? He was a Piston. I apologize.
He helped the Hawks in the playoffs one year. So
the Hawks, right? Yeah. Yes. Did he get a ring with the Spurs?
No, that was who they lost. So
they all right. Damn it. Poor T-Mac.
Yeah.
That's why they lost, because they had T-Mac on their bench. So he's like, I didn't do anything. I'm just here. I haven't taken my warm-ups off.
Yeah, right, yeah. Maybe I
forgot about the Hawks year. Jeez, man. That's...
Hey, it's a fine memory. He had one very fine quarter against the Celtics in that series. So.
Who could forget the fine quarter?
I
think they hang a banner for that, right, as well. Tracy McGrady, he had a good quarter for us.
Retire his number, why not?
Right. It's pretty good, but there's T-Mac there. But yeah, as far as him, as you mentioned, he's in terms of all time, I mean, he's number 9, and he's kind of in the same realm as you had Michael Jordan at 73.4, Tracy McGrady at 72.1. This is win shares by age 25, and then Ed Macauley at 69.4. So another guy we mentioned there. But obviously, T-Mac coming in as a high schooler sort of helps him get a few more years there. But when you really look at his career, it really was a few years, really until he went to Orlando when he really broke out and was able to sort of flourish a little bit. So yeah, I mean, while he had a few year head start, the first year was really nothing. I mean, his rookie year he was really kind of floundering and doing not much. So, but yeah, still an impressive career. By age 25?
Yeah. And if you look at value of replacement player, another way of evaluating it, he's actually third behind Jordan and LeBron. He's well behind LeBron. LeBron's at like 61. Jordan's at 41, of course, fewer years, and McGrady's at 38, but he's ahead of Garnett. He's ahead of, Kobe, other guys who started at 18, around the same time. So he definitely, at that point looked like he was, on track to, he definitely was one of these guys who absolutely he was on track to be like a top 10 player. I mean, he definitely was on that path, I think, ahead of almost anybody else who we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll move on now to Elton Brand. He was the first overall pick of the 1999 NBA draft. He was to be the Bulls' post-Jordan, Pippen, Jackson savior. And he looked a little part for at least his rookie year. He averaged 20.1 points per game, 10 rebounds per game in his rookie year. Shared Rookie of the Year honors with Steve Francis. And now just a quick aside, what do you think about shared awards? Are you pro-shared awards or anti-shared MVPs and shared Rookie of the Years or whatever?
It's not like people are planning to share. It just kind of works out that way. So I think it's fine. I mean, I don't think I think it's okay, especially Rookie of the Year. I mean, it's a little weird for MVP. I mean, that's only happened once and it was in the ABA. But I don't know, for the other awards, it just seems like it's not that important. I mean, it's not like making or breaking.
It is life or death, Jason. Right. I don't know what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's I think it's neat. I guess I'm for rewarding good play all the time. So if two guys happen to share, if there's two guys who are worthy of Rookie of the Year one year, if it's a particularly strong year, we're gonna have some years where Malcolm Brogdon's winning the Rookie of the Year where there isn't really that good of a rookie and it has to go to somebody. So I guess it kind of makes up for that in a sense.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because this year is a pretty good case between Donovan Mitchell and Ben Simmons.
Right.
Like, both guys, it's really hard to pick. And I hear people being like, oh, I don't know who to pick. Just pick both. Who cares? Yeah. Like, it's Rookie of the Year. Like, reward both these guys. Hey, we have two really good rookies. Yeah. Let's give them both the awards. So who cares?
Yeah, one person cannot vote for both, right? It just happens to be that, half vote for one guy, half vote for the other, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I get what you're
like
saying,
you said, it's not something where they're like, well, I guess like everybody gets together and decides that that's who it's going to be or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, but instead of making them like fight to the death to figure out who is actually the Rookie of the Year, they just decide both of them could be.
Hopefully, no one will fight to the death for the Rookie of the Year.
No, that'd be bad. Yeah, the Steve Francis Elton Brand fight to the death was the last time they did that. It did not work out very well at all.
Yeah,
maybe that's why both these guys fell off after the race.
Maybe. Yeah, if you got to fight to the death afterward, it's not great. No. Yeah.
But so Elton Brand's career took a little bit of a different turn in June 2001 rather. Brand was traded to the Clippers for the draft rights to Tyson Chandler. The Bulls were done with Elton Brand as their savior and now had two new saviors in Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler. That worked out equally as well. And Brand had a pretty good run there for the Clippers for a while, but one thing that we definitely love in this podcast is anytime Donald Sterling looks like an idiot. And this is a great case because when Elton Brand, he became a restricted free agent in 2003, the Miami Heat made him an offer $82 million over 6 years in what was an unprecedented move by Donald Sterling at the time. The Clippers matched Miami's offer and managed to keep Brand a Clipper for a few more years. Prior to this, the biggest contract that Sterling had ever approved was a 5-year, $15 million deal for Eric Piatkowski. I'll let you go with that as you will, but Eric Piatkowski Gretzky was the only big contract that Alan Sterling ever decided to sign in his career as an owner, but what was good though about this, to make him really look like an idiot, is Sterling had refused to offer Brand a contract extension 1 year prior, when he'd been willing to accept less than the maximum. So he could have easily gotten Brand at a cheaper price, said, no, we don't need that, and then ended up having to pay through the nose to keep Elton Brand. So pretty good. But anyway, it worked out, that deal, because Brand had a pretty good year, a pretty good career with the Clippers. But ironically enough, in this exercise, the year that everybody would kind of consider the best for Elton Brand, which was 2006, a great year for the Clippers. You know, they sort of made a really good playoff run. Brand looked like a monster that year. 2006, that was not included. He was 26 this year. So everything that we're talking about here is up until when he really had what I would consider that breakout season or whatever, which still shows pretty cool of like how good Elton Brand was to that point. And what's kind of weird about this exercise and you know, including Elton Brand in this is 55.1 win shares. So that's the 26th most by age 25, but was slightly above 50 win shares for the rest of his career. So I had a great amount of years. Obviously had injuries and sort of slowed down when he went to Philadelphia and kind of bounced around after that. But yeah, it's pretty interesting that you probably shouldn't count because he wasn't a superstar at any level, you know, before age 25, but maybe he should have kind of been, but doesn't appear to be on a Hall of Fame track. But he didn't really ever have like a peak, and he was just kind of pretty good for his entire career. But it's interesting because he shows up on this list and he shows up as being one of those top guys by age 25 or whatever, but still was pretty good after 25, but yet still doesn't really feel like he fits in any camp. Like he was great at a time and then fell off, or was great all time. He's just kind of a guy that sort of hung around for a lot of years and was pretty good. So I don't know exactly how to define the legacy of Elton Brand.
Yeah. You know, one other thing is that, like, he didn't, you know, some of these other guys came right out of high school and were able to, had extra time to build the legacy to, you know, get to 25 to kind of build up the numbers. Where Brand, you know, he had 2 years of college, or was at age 20 at least when he joined the league. So, you know, he wasn't 18. He didn't quite have the same advantage that, you know, ahead of, you know, guys in, you know, previous generations would have had. You know, so he kind of you know, he doesn't have the cheat in that sense. Yeah, I mean, it was really obviously it was the ACL injury that, you know, or Achilles injury that took him out, that changed his career. Even though he was still okay after that and managed to hang on for like a long time, he didn't have that superstar career. The guy, it's going to be interesting. He'll be, in terms of Hall of Fame case. You know, he's very like, I think he definitely could make it, but it's definitely a borderline case, and it kind of depends on what you value your very long. There's definitely guys who have had his resume who have not gone in, but there are definitely guys who have had worse resumes that have gone in. So it's you know, there's a lot of
it's really interesting. Yeah, his career, the Hall of Fame probability on Basketball Reference, they have him at 7.2, which is about probably where I would put him too. It's just like, because he's a guy who, you know, put up gaudy numbers throughout his career, only 2 All-Star games though, so he didn't really emerge amongst his, you know, peers or whatever. I don't believe he was I think he was on one All-NBA team that won 2006 season, like we're saying, but other than that, not really ever, you know, anything more. So yeah, it's weird where you kind of define him, because in, you know, you sort of strip out the context and just look at his numbers. If I just gave you Elton Brand's career numbers, you go, oh geez, wow, what a great career. But then you look at it amongst his peers in the era. I don't know. It's very weird how to define Elton Brand. He's going to be an interesting case as the years go on, but people might just forget about him, and he might be one of those fun ones that, you know, the next Curtis Harris in 20 years is like, why isn't Elton Brand in the Hall of Fame? Like, that's our hope. Or the current Curtis Harris, maybe could do that. But I like to think that there's some, then, but yeah. There's some middle schooler right now that's planning on becoming the next Curtis Harris, and is just gonna like really ape for Elton Brand for like 20 years to be the man to be, you know, Hall of Famer that's just not quite there. But no, I mean, it's gaudy numbers. I mean, averaging 20 points a lot, and not being the most efficient, you know, 20-point scorer or whatever. But obviously era dependent. It wasn't, you know. We're sort of living in an era now where you know, what is efficient now wasn't efficient in 2002. You know, in 2002, teams were fine just plopping the ball back, you know, to a guy back to the basket and let Elton Brand sort of work or whatever. And I mean, you can't argue there was some success there too. I mean, gave LA pretty big success, and when he went to Philly, obviously the injury sort of sapped a lot, but they had some decent success as well. And then of course he also went to the Hawks too, because, you know, everybody on this list ends up at the Hawks. The last 2 years.
Eventually the Hawks, yeah.
to the retirement tour with the Atlanta Hawks. That's pretty good. So
that's always good. So yeah. So if you're looking at value of replacement, he is, and this is post 74. He's tied for 15th with James Harden, slightly ahead of Kawhi Leonard, a little bit behind Shaq and Dwight Howard. So, you know, he's among some, you know, luminaries on this list when it comes to 25. He's not absolutely like in the top 10, but he's, you know, he's solidly strong there. So he definitely had a good run, and overall, I think his numbers are good enough that, you know, you can definitely make the case. But So next we got Gilbert Arenas. Was selected 31st overall by the Golden State Warriors. Trenton Hassel was drafted directly ahead of him. So actually, surprisingly deep draft with Tyson Chandler, Pau Gasol, Joe Johnson, Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Tony Parker, Arenas, Mehmet Okur, and of course Ruben Boumti. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think it was Boumje, I believe.
Boumje.
But
Okay,
I just remember because I used to play NBA 2K a lot, and I would always be the Blazers because they had a pretty fun deep team. And if I'd beat my friends, as I was, of course I would always do. But
yeah.
Is that later in the games you put Ruben Boumje in because he was like at the end of the bench and he was a pretty solid player. He was pretty good. But it's a deep draft, and a lot of when you look at that, like a Randolph, Jared Wallace, Parker, Arenas, Okur, even to a lesser extent Joe Johnson, are not high draft picks at all. So it was a really, in terms of like that second round and late first round, a lot of great value out of them. You're talking about some really great players, some era top era players as well, in terms of like guys like a Zach Randolph and Jared Wallace had a pretty good run of years as well. And then Tony Parker, of course, speaks for himself. So it's pretty cool to see how deep that draft can be, and how if sometimes you can find some gems in the late first and the second round.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of these guys took a little while to find their role. Like Pau obviously was really good right away, but Randolph took a little while. A few teams. Chandler took a while. Parker was pretty good right away, but even he had his struggles early on. With the Spurs, obviously, a lot of team success. So. Sort of. A lot of these guys, weren't stars right away, but obviously carved out, great careers. A couple of them are definitely Hall of Famers. Rookie year he was fine, just kind of an average player. 10.9 points per game. Then great second year, was NBA Most Improved Player, and then ended up getting a 6-year, $60 million contract with the Wizards. There was in fact, a rule named after him. If he had been a first-round pick, the Warriors would have been able to use salary cap exemptions to match the offer, but at the time, the exceptions could not be used to re-sign second-round picks, so the Warriors were unable to match the rule. They were unable to go over salary cap to match it. The Gilbert Arenas rule was later created to allow teams like the Warriors the ability to re-sign restricted free agents who had not been first-round picks. In 04-05, he and Larry Hughes teamed to give the Wizards the highest scoring backcourt duo in the NBA, and they led the Wizards to a 45-win season, their first playoff berth in '97, and really their first kind of sustained success in since really the 70s. I mean, they were never great, but they were pretty good for a while. I think they've been kind of usurped now by the John Wall, Bradley Beal years. That team's been a little bit better, but like I said, it had been a long time since they were any good, so there was a lot of excitement there. He had 3 All-Star games by the time he was 25, 47.9 win shares by age 25, which is 38th all-time by that age, but only 3.5 total win shares in 5 seasons after. He had another severe injury. I forget if it was Achilles tear or not, but he basically was done after that. Was traded to the Magic and bounced around after that. It was not good.
No, yeah, the Gilbert thing, and then obviously there was other
yes,
as well that played into it,
yeah,
but
bringing guns in the locker room,
not ideal,
not ideal either. Yeah, I blanked on that for a second, which obviously he's most famous for, unfortunately. That's he's never going to get his number retired by the Wizards, I assume, and the kind of like legacy defining things were like, okay, even if he just fell short of the Hall of Fame, like that's going to keep him from really getting any of those second tier honors that like guys like him, like a Brandon Roy, will get with the Blazers, get honored by that.
Sure,
he's never going to get that kind of stuff because he just because that's pretty much souring his reputation.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, go back and watch some of the highlights, this guy was a force for a number of years and was a great story as well because he, really didn't, in the Warriors, he was emerging, and obviously he won, Most Improved and sort of broke out a little bit after those first, year or whatever, but then goes to the Wizards and really just like completely transforms that franchise. I mean, that franchise owes a lot of their, in a lot of ways, because they were nothing. I mean, the franchise had so many issues for so many years, and that they drafted great players. I mean, they obviously had Weber, they had, Dwight Howard, they had guy after guy after guy that would come in there, and it just never really kind of came together. Arenas teams with Larry Hughes and a few other guys, and they sort of come there and they get some success and they start looking like a great team again and look like they're on track to do something more. And then obviously the injuries sap him, and then obviously the personal stuff sort of saps a little bit of his career as well. And then he bounces around at the end of his year. Did not go to the Hawks though, I don't believe, for Gilbert Arenas. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how his career sort of the way it went and where it was by age 25. He was definitely on pace to be, maybe not an all-time great, but definitely a guy that we would talk about in sort of, had that trajectory gone on, a guy that was an all-time great scorer, but it just didn't quite all come together for him. All right, and then we'll end with Luol Deng here. He's one of or not end. We got a few more guys to talk about here, but as far as this little exercise, the best by age 25, and surprisingly, I was kind of interested by this. Luol Deng is 49th in win shares by age 25 at 43.9. So not maybe all time there, but still top 50 in terms of win shares by age 25. I would not have expected Luol Deng to do that, especially given sort of where he came in and how he came into the draft, and obviously not coming from high school, playing a few years in Duke. But he was 19 when he came in the league, so that definitely does play a part in that. 29.3 win shares in 7 seasons since that age 25. So as we can see, 43.9 by age 25, and now 23.9 in the 7 seasons since. So yeah, now he's consistently under 1 per year in win shares. His career is winding down. He's kind of in exile there in the Lakers. So I don't know if he's necessarily can't play anymore, but the Lakers don't really want to play him. It's this very odd thing. So we'll see sort of where the Luol Deng thing goes.
He could still land on the Hawks. It's still possible.
There's a very good chance he could land on the Hawks because he's got a big contract. He got signed in that big summer where everybody just decided to throw around money like crazy because the salary cap would never stop going up, and then the salary cap stopped going up, and now you have contracts with Luol Deng.
At some point, so
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They'll try to because he's unfortunate on the Lakers and a team that really wants to play all their young players and has an older veteran that makes a lot of money in Luol Deng. So it's a weird situation right now, but we'll see how it ends up going. But a little bit of background on Deng: he was selected 7th in the 2004 draft by the Phoenix Suns. Immediately traded to the Chicago Bulls for Jackson Vorman and a future first-round pick. That pick eventually became Nate Robinson. And, of course, if you followed any of the Suns' transactions over the 2000s, you know that they moved him to the Knicks for with Quentin Richardson, for Kurt Thomas and Dejon Thompson. And that was kind of a thing that the Suns always drafted good players, but then immediately traded them to save money. To save like $1 million, they traded Rajon Rondo, or to save, $2 million, they would trade, a Nate Robinson or whatever. But I mean, Kurt Thomas was a good player for them, so I don't hate on that. But the Suns in the 2000s were a consistent trade young, high draft picks for either lower draft picks or for nothing or for cash in some cases. So it's kind of a thing. But
I mean, the fact that like the Suns could have kept Luol Deng and he would have probably been a really good player in those 7 seconds or less teams.
right.
Yeah, that would have added some depth there and would have like totally seemed like he would have fit pretty well in. Could have had a very different career had he done that. I mean, he had some good years with the Bulls, obviously, but that would have been that seems like that would have really helped the Suns for sure. So.
Oh, yeah, he would have been awesome on the Suns. But, of course, they had to save like $1 million or something.
Sure.
So, in his rookie year, Deng team with fellow high draft picks Kirk Hinrich, Ben Gordon, Tyson Chandler, and Eddie Curry to help the Bulls make their first playoff appearance in 7 years. The team also had a 24-win improvement under Scott Skiles, so it was a pretty good improvement there. He was all-rookie first team, and, Deng's solid defense, all-around skills helped the Bulls make 3 straight playoffs and the Eastern Conference semifinals in 2007. He had made 2 All-Star games by the time he was his age 25, and then, obviously, it still had a pretty good, collection of years after that, but then sort of injuries and overplaying by Tom Thibodeau and, some spinal fusions and not spinal fusions. What do you have? A spinal tap. Yeah, he had the spinal tap. That he nearly died. Yeah. But other than nearly dying, he had a pretty good other part of his career. But then he bounced around a little bit, went to Miami. Not the Hawks yet, but he's in the Lakers right now. Yeah. Went to Miami, played for Cleveland for a little bit as well after he was traded from the Bulls, but has sort of bounced around since and hasn't really quite found his footing. But had a really great career by age 25. A guy that I think we kind of underrate how good he was for a while, and a lot of his value comes in terms of defense and all around game. As I said, he wasn't really a great scorer, he wasn't really a great shooter, but he was a really good defender. Could really defend 1 through 5 any position. Was known for being able to try to defend LeBron James at points. But had a really really good early career, and then sort of. Maybe I don't know how he fits in this in terms of being an all-time great, but I mean, I think he would be a guy that we definitely, if things sort of stayed the way they were for a while, would be one of those guys. I don't know where
maybe type of
a Sean Marion type, or like one of those guys that we look at and like, oh yeah, like he had an underrated career and maybe deserves to be considered amongst the top 150 or top. I mean, I doubt he'd be a top 100.
I think 100 is fair. If he had continued along the same path, probably not any better than that though.
No, but that's about his peak. But that's still, I mean, I don't think he's anywhere near that level right now. So
no, yeah, those 07 Bulls were. I mean, that seemed like a changing of the guard a little bit. I mean, they smashed the Heat pretty well in that playoff series, from what I remember. That looked kind of like, oh, these Bulls might actually be like kind of an upcoming power in the East.
Yes, Jason. Yes, we did. It didn't happen.
And then then of course the Celtics got Kevin Garnett and kind of changed the the path of the league, and they had some injuries and stuff and trades, but eventually like those and then they kind of latched into Derrick Rose, and then had another great another pretty good run there, but and he was part of that, but yeah, I mean, he was definitely someone who looked pretty interesting, and that Bulls team's kind of a little bit forgotten because of he didn't last very long. But for a moment there, they looked like they were going to do some more interesting stuff than they ended up.
And they had it was a super young team too, because like you look at the roster, you got Ben Gordon, he was 23, Luol Deng 21, Kirk Hinrich 26, Nocioni who came over from Argentina, he was only 27. Ben Wallace they brought in as a free agent, and that actually was not as great as a lot of people thought, but I mean he had a pretty good few good years.
It was too
with
much money, but he was still like a good defensive player and like was helpful toward winning. I mean he was he was overpaid, but it, and there were definitely like some unhappy locker room stuff, and they they eventually traded Chandler, and so. It wasn't a good long-term team, but he was still useful at that point.
Right, and then you have the Scott Skiles factor where like he gets teams to a point and then they all hate him, and then he just has to go away because then they suck and they don't want to play for him anymore. But that's the Skiles thing. He did that with Milwaukee too. It's like, holy shit, this Milwaukee team's great, and it's like, we hate Scott Skiles. And they're like, all right, we're gone. Like,
one thing I wanted to say about Deng before we move on is that except for the Lakers, he and Dwayne Wade have played for the exact same franchises. So.
Oh wow, you're right. Jeez.
So hopefully the Wade can play for the Lakers someday, so that they can match 4, because that'd be fun.
I never thought of that. That's interesting. Yeah,
that's the type of thing that popped in my head every once in a while. I don't know why.
That's what you pay for on this free podcast here.
I don't know why.
Those great anecdotes.
Yeah. So anything else we want to get to before we look at some of the percentages?
No, I think we're good on the best under 25.
So yeah, we're kind of looking at the players who, by win shares, who in their first 5 seasons had the most win shares, and then kind of looking at the portion of the production in their first 5 years versus the rest of their career. So guys who had extremely high percentage of win shares in their first 5 years were George Mikan, who's 3rd overall in their first 5 years. 87% of his win shares came in his first 5 years, but this is easily explained. He only played 6.5 years in the BAA and the NBA, and he's still 68th all time in NBA, ABA career win shares, despite the lack of time there, which is kind of amazing, honestly. To have that amount in that short of time it says something for sure.
Oh no, definitely, yeah, but yeah, it's easily explained by given just how the guys played or whatever. But still, to have him still at that point and still have him as high as he is pretty remarkable, given how few years he actually did play. Yeah,
I guess I'll list the names of guys who are at the top just to give us some context here. So Wilt is number 1 with 104.9. Kareem is number 2 with 101.8. Mikan is 3rd with 94.4. Then we got Oscar Robertson, Artis Gilmore, who are in the 80s. In the 70s, we have David Robinson, Julius Erving, Michael Jordan, and then a few guys who are in the 60s. Ed Macauley, also on this list at number 9. Neil Johnston at 66 at number 10. And then Walt Bellamy after him. Then we got Duncan, LeBron, Barkley, Dan Issel, Arizin, Chris Paul, Larry Bird. So mostly all-time greats here with a few kind of exceptions that we'll get into. But after Mikan and other guys who have extremely high portion in their first 5 years, Neil Johnston at 72%. And he's in the top 100 win shares all time. Ed Macauley, 69%, also in the top 100. So, and again, we obviously got Wynn and Macauley, and these guys just had short careers because of the era that they played in. So that's most of the explanation there. So an interesting guy I want to dig a little bit more deeply into is Walt Bellamy, and he had 51% of his win shares in his first 5 years. He played 13 seasons, so that's a really high portion there. And it's sort of interesting to look at the track of his career. He was a 2-time All-American Indiana, played in the 1960 Olympics, who was one of the probably the greatest team ever assembled at that time. and was the number 1 pick in 61 to the expansion Chicago Packers. And those Packers were really bad. We'll get into that. As he was Rookie of the Year in 62, he had 31.6 points per game, which is second all-time for a rookie next to Wilt Chamberlain, and his 19 rebounds per game, which is the third most, and he set an NBA record with 51.9% field goal percentage. However, the Packers were absolutely terrible. They had the 6th worst win-loss record and 6th worst SRS in BAA and NBA history at the time. Curtis Harris wrote a good piece when Bellamy died in 2013 and pointed out that out of their 10-man rotation, 6 of the players were out of the league the very next season, and 3 of the others combined to play just 212 more NBA games. So that was obviously not a good team. So he was basically asked to do everything and did it well. I mean, did it obviously efficiently. Scored efficiently. It was good. But looking more at when he went into his career, he was an all-star those first 4 seasons as the team became the Zephyrs the next year after somebody figured out, hey, Chicago Packers, not a good idea, and then went to Baltimore as the Bullets, and he never made an All-NBA team despite those 4 All-Star appearances, but it's not really that surprising because he was behind Wilt and Russell all of those years, who basically had a lock on the first and second spots. But if you look at the list of guys who were centers in the 60s, I think he's pretty clearly the third best there. And some of that's due to the fact he played most of the 60s. I mean, Willis Reed was only there half the decade. Thurman, started in 64, so they kind of started late. I mean, really, Zelmo Beatty, Red Kerr, Reed, and Thurman are the only other options that you could argue there. But I think, given longevity, given production, I think he's definitely the third best center in the 60s. His first coach, Slick Leonard, of course, famously later the Pacers coach, said Walt wasn't a highly motivated player night in and night out. He'd have some great games and then have some ones where he didn't show up, but he was an excellent player. His scoring declined from 31.6 points to 19 points in 67 and stayed in the teens for his later of his career. But as we said, the talent around him got better. The Bullets did finally make the playoffs in year 4, and they had Gus Johnson, Bailey Howell, and Don Ohl, who are all real good players. In fact, they upset the Hawks and Bob Pettit last year and then took the Lakers to 6 games that season. That was the series where Jerry West averaged almost 47 points per game, and Elgin Baylor seriously injured his knee in game 1 of that series. So, West took over. It's actually a really classic series. All those games were really, really close and had some really good teams. And in his career, he only won one more playoff series in 1970 with the Hawks over the Bulls. And then kind of bounced around after that. Traded the Knicks the next season. Not really a good fit with Willis Reed, but also had some pretty good talent. They did make the playoffs those years. But finally, when he was traded for Dave DeBusschere, that turned around the team. He ended up getting stuck on the Pistons. Set a record that year by playing 88 games in a season because of how many games the Pistons had left when he acquired them. After 2 years with the Pistons that were not that noteworthy, he actually settled into played with the Hawks. Had an interesting team with Pete Maravich and those guys, Lou Hudson and those guys, and then ended his career playing 1 game with the Jazz. And it took a while to get into the Hall of Fame, but finally was inducted in 1993. He's one of 10 NBA, ABA players all time with 20,000 points and 14,000 rebounds. And was really durable. Only missed 6 games in his first 11 season and only missed 12 in his career overall. So, and when he retired, he was 6th all time in scoring and 3rd all time in rebounding and 3rd all time in shooting percentage. So, he really, was like a productive player, but just didn't really win anywhere. And obviously, as we've said, got most of that value in his first 5 years. But had an interesting career. More like I said, didn't have a lot of winning along those times, but I think was just so overshadowed by Wilt and Russell that didn't quite get the appreciation that maybe he deserved.
Yeah, and not having a single spot where you can really say, okay, Walt Bellamy was a X team's legend. You know what I mean? Where he bounces around a little much, and that's always an issue, especially in this era, where most guys were at one spot. I mean, there was Wilt went to a few different teams, and that was seen as like, oh well, so I don't know what's up with Wilt if he's got to. Whereas Bill Russell's obviously Celtics. He's synonymous with the team. I would say he's probably synonymous with the Bullets, but it's like you can make a case he's just as synonymous with it's hard to make a case he's synonymous with any one team. and that always hurts you as well. If you can't just say, oh, Walt Bellamy X and the team that initially comes up. So that always hurts guys' legacies as well, particularly at this time of the, in the NBA when it wasn't common for guys to move around and bounce around a little bit. And Bellamy was bouncing around, pretty frequently, almost every few years, on a different team in a different franchise.
So among the guys on this list who kind of breaking down some of the percentages, guys who had a high percentage of their win shares in their first 5 seasons. Oscar had 44%, Artis Gilmore 43%, David Robinson 44%, Irving 41%, Wilt 38%, and Kareem was 37%, which is extra high for him because he played 20 years. The other guys played, like 14, 15 years. Artis did play 18, I think, years, but the rest of these guys had more normal length careers. So the fact that Kareem had so much of that in the first 5 seasons is really interesting.
And that he was just so goddamn good that it was just he accumulated 273 total win shares or whatever.
Right.
So it's unbelievable.
He is by far the most. So that also helps. And more like a regular portion, I would say kind of in the 30s we have Barkley at 36%, Russell at 35%, Hakeem at 33%, Jordan at 34%, Duncan at 32%, Shaq at 31%, LeBron at 30%. Of course, his career isn't over yet, so he's kind of hard to measure here. But the rest of these guys, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what you would expect. I mean, if you play 15 years, you might expect somewhere around the low to mid 30s. If you were going to evenly distribute it, obviously be 33%. But usually, you're not going to produce as much when you're a rookie or second season. But you get third and fourth and fifth years, you're going to kind of make up for that somewhat. Probably going to have the most in that in year 6 through 10, which is going to be your prime. You're going to start to decline at the end of that, and then your last 5 years will be less. So, so I think these guys all kind of fit in with that distribution for the most part. Although Duncan did have a longer career, Hakeem did have a longer career, so some of that's a little bit off. But if you're talking guys who had a low percentage in the Reggie Miller 27%, Dirk at 26%, although he played 20 years, so this is actually about average. Moses Malone 23%, John Stockton and Karl Malone were 22 and 21%. Excuse me. Respectively, and of course they didn't come straight out of high school. They both had full, I think, 4 years of college. I think Malone maybe had 3 years of college, but either way they it's not like they got early starts. Where KG and Kobe both at 20%, but both came straight out of high school, so that makes a little bit more sense. So, but I thought that was interesting to look at the distribution between the all-time greats because it does vary very wildly.
That is, and these are guys that we're going to hopefully explore a little bit more in a future show, and guys particularly like Stockton, Malone, and even doing a lesser extent, Dirk, guys that later in their lives, later in their careers, sort of had or emerged a lot, and that's sort of where they accumulated a lot of their numbers, a lot of their stats or whatever. Particularly a guy like a Stockton, you look at Stockton's career, and we sort of think of him as great for, but there was 4 or 5 years where Stockton was just fine. I mean, he was okay, he was a good player until he turns 32, and then it's oh shit, now he's really great or whatever, and accumulates a lot of that. I was surprised by Karl Malone though, because I thought Malone was always a guy who, when he came into the league, was always pretty productive. But I guess it speaks less to how productive he was his first few years and more to how awesome he was in the later his years and how productive he got later in his career and how productive he was until basically he was 40. So that I think that's where you get maybe a little bit of him in there. But yeah, we do want to explore some of these guys because it is a little more fun to see the guys, a little bit of the late bloomers and the guys that really did a lot of their, heavy lifting, later in their careers.
Right. Yeah. I think we're going to dig into that in another show, looking at kind of like after age 32 or whatever. And, the last 5 years of career, how much value they added, versus, because some guys obviously do it early, some guys do it late, sometimes some guys do it their entire career, depending on the guy. So yeah, absolutely. So looking at value over replacement player, if you look at the guys who are top in their first 5 years, we have Jordan as number 1 with 41.4. David Robinson and LeBron are 2 and 3 at about 39. And then the other guys in the 30s are Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, and Chris Paul. Guys who are in the 20s are Tim Duncan, Magic Johnson, Julius Erving. And then, and those are, basically all-time greats, post 74. That list I don't think is too surprising. And then we get some really interesting ones. Number 10 is Grant Hill. Number 11 is Bobby Jones. Then he's right ahead of Akeem Olajuwon. Then we have Andre Karolinko, Clyde Drexler, Shaquille O'Neal, Steve Francis, Kevin Garnett, Bob McAdoo, Sidney Moncrief, and Elton Brand are top 20. So I think that's really interesting. Also, Brand is tied with Marcus Johnson and Dwayne Wade, all three of them exactly at 21.1. So it's sort of interesting to look at what's going on there, and some of the percentages of those guys in terms of their careers. Grant Hill had 60% of his. He was 49th all-time in win shares. Now, not surprising because of the injuries, of course. Bobby Jones had 58%, excuse me. Andrei Kirilenko also 58%. Steve Francis 81%, which is kind of mind-blowing. The fact that he was 16th on this list. And the fact that he really, I kind of knew that he fell off pretty quickly, but how dramatically he actually led the NBA in value replacement player in the 2001 season. But the accumulation of injuries, drugs, that well-documented drug issues that he's had after his career, I think some of that is assumed to have been during his career as well. Getting into fights with management, that kind of thing. Cuttino Mobley getting traded, when he was with the Magic, all that stuff kind of led to a dramatic decline in his career. But man, those first 5 years were really something. He was really pretty high up there and kind of definitely on track, I think, for a top 50 career.
Oh, absolutely. No, and he was a superstar at that time, too. And it's hard to remember. And obviously, it was an NBA that was sort of looking desperately to find their next superstar, their next guy or whatever. You had, obviously Tim Duncan putting up great numbers, but not as marketable of a star. But Francis was one of those guys. I rember him being one of the big dudes. And him and McGrady were guys that the NBA really rallied behind. And Vince Carter to a lesser extent as well. And Francis deserved it. He was great. And then it all kind of it never really came together after that. And there was always on-and-off issues and team success issues and chemistry issues, and like you said, even possibly the drugs and some other stuff that went on with Steve Francis. But this guy was really, really good, and it's going to be a little lost to time how good he was those first few years. But definitely pretty remarkable. Yeah,
I think it's kind of similar to Arenas in a lot of respects, although there wasn't the one dramatic injury that kind of explained it all. It was accumulation of things, but another guy who had a really high percentage as well, Bob McAdoo, 80%. And this one, he was an MVP. This one kind of makes sense. Well, it makes sense that he had created so much value early in his career because of the fact that he fell off pretty quickly, but the reasons that he fell off still seem a little bit murky. But we'll kind of break it down. This might be another one that we explore in even greater depth in the future, because I think he's a really interesting guy, a really big pioneer in terms of being a great shooting big man. But he had 80% of his value replacement came in his first 5 seasons, and actually it's 4 seasons because it was not measured yet in his rookie year. So steals and blocks weren't available in his rookie year. So, he was rookie of the year, MVP in his 3rd season. He had 3 scoring titles, and was great with the Buffalo Braves. They were an up and coming team, 5-time All-Star. Did have a couple of those with the Knicks, 2-time All-NBA, and in the middle of the 76 season. Sports Illustrated called him the quickest tall man, the finest shooter, and the most astounding outside scoring machine ever to play basketball. Jack Ramsey said that he could become the greatest big man to ever play the game. And Bill Russell, who was coach of the Sonics, said that he's the greatest shooter of all time, period. Forget that bit about greatest shooting big man. So that was the reputation that he had at the time. And then, he's also famous for coming back with the Lakers in '82 and being a really strong reserve for them. Won 2 titles and made 4 finals for them, and was really good at fitting into roles. So what happened in between is a little bit murky, but he definitely had some conflicts with Buffalo. Felt like he didn't get enough attention there. Felt that he was a little sensitive to criticism. In that 76 season, after the year after he won the MVP, he has to be excused from a game because of back problems, and then had some issues with Paul Snyder, the Buffalo owner, asked him to see a second doctor. McAdoo refused, and then he was suspended for 1 game because of that. Eventually, he was traded to the Knicks basically for cash. They did get Tom McMillan and John Gianelli, but that was not nearly the value that he would have gotten. And even though those Knicks are not seen as those are seen as rough years for the Knicks, McAdoo actually did he performed pretty well, at least statistically. But there was definitely some internal clashes. He and Spencer Haywood were playing together, and that relationship was not strong. Haywood was definitely in the midst of drug issues and other things going on, and Haywood was also hurt a lot during that time, so they didn't actually play together all that much. He was still third in the league in scoring in '78. But he was traded midway the next year, so things actually were okay in New York. That wasn't, they underperformed, but it wasn't like he was bad there. It was more like it was just kind of a disappointment. It was I don't know, kind of like Carmelo Anthony in New York, maybe. I mean, that's probably a decent. It didn't last as long, but that's kind of a decent comparison, I would say. To
right, we're still productive, still but it was just kind of didn't ever feel right, or
it never fit because of there were other issues that were going on as well. So. So then it gets pretty weird. He is traded to Boston for Tom Barker and 3 first-round picks. Red Auerbach was not consulted about the trade.
Whoops.
It was the owner of the Celtics, John Brown, who had also been the owner of the Braves, who had been part of sending McAdoo out to the Knicks. He gets him back for the 3 first-round picks. Auerbach had plans for those picks, so he was not happy about doing that. McAdoo was behind Dave Cowens, who at that point was player coach. So he ended up not playing as much as he wanted to. He did still score 24.8 points per game in 60 games. So it was still not unproductive, but was definitely in a lesser role and not thrilled about it. And the Celtics were obviously not thrilled to have him. Eventually, he was sent to the Pistons as compensation for the Boston signing of M.L. Carr, who at that point was a good player, would later become known for waving the towel behind Larry Bird's Celtics later on. But at that point, was still a pretty good player. And Detroit was not good. There were some injuries going on. He played like a season and a half there. He filed a grievance with the Players Association while he was with the Pistons. I have to look more into what that was about, but only had 10 games with the Nets, and eventually he and the Nets could not agree on a contract the next year, and then he finally the Lakers took a chance on him, trading him for cash and a second-round pick, and then he settled in there and was good. But yeah, some weirdness going on during those times, and I think a lot of people would make the assumption of drugs, but I've not seen anything that links him to cocaine or drug use during that time. It just seems like it was, combination of attitude, combination of bad situations, combination of injuries. So that's again we'll have to dig into. And it took a while, but he was elected into the Basketball Hall of Fame, I believe, in the early 2000s. So you did eventually get his due. Like I said, he was MVP. So I think there's no question that the whole thing is career. He did get that second act, but that whole middle tenure, there's just some weirdness going on there.
Yeah, it kind of stinks because he had a run of as you said, MVP run, a run of All-Star games. Was really one of the top tier players of the league in scoring for a few years, and then obviously the fits and all, and we forget that these guys aren't machines sometimes. Sometimes when you don't feel like you're in the right place or you're not quite sure what team you're going to be on next, and he finds out that he gets traded by reading the newspaper and stuff like that. That stuff grinds on you a little bit, and it seemed like he never quite felt comfortable in New York. Never felt comfortable in Boston. Detroit was a brief time when he was comfort, and it was actually his numbers reflected that too. He had a really good year in Detroit, but then he's in New Jersey. It was nothing. It seemed like he really just a lot of the energy got sapped out of him. And then when you go to the Lakers, obviously he's not the same player he was because now he's 30. He's obviously getting into the older part of his career, but really found a niche as sort of a bench scorer for that team and won 2 titles and seemed to kind of figure it out. So it was cool to see him get that little bit of a resurrection. But I think it's very similar a case like to Bellamy, where it's like you can't really define him by one franchise, so it always hurts then the all-time case. And what really hurts him too is that we're in a between period, which should have been arguably his peak, was spent bouncing around between teams, not quite sure where he would go, you're not quite sure where he should fit in, how he should fit in, all that sort of stuff. So that kind of stinks, is that that 26 to 30 is just kind of this lost period for him. So you wonder what could have happened had he just been in one stable situation, had he just went to Detroit or whatever and just stuck around there for a while, or the Boston thing hadn't happened or the New York thing hadn't happened or whatever. So yeah, definitely an interesting case there of a guy who had he had found one home base, how different things could have possibly been.
Yeah, probably the one place that was his home base was really Buffalo, of course, who doesn't exist anymore, and the Clippers have not really had any interest in celebrating those years in any way. So, yeah, it's been lost a little bit that way too. I mean, yeah, he's lucky as the Lakers part of his career because obviously there's a lot of Lakers fans, and he's finally remembered for having a relatively small role in those teams, but obviously an important role on those teams. So yeah, the last couple guys we're going to talk about it just a little bit is Sidney Moncrief, who 63% of his win shares came in the first 5 years, and value replacement, and Marcus Johnson 62%. So they're right, like basically in the same boat. They both have they're both in the 80s in terms of value of replacement all time. And yeah, they're right, kind of in the same, almost exactly in the same spot there. And yeah, both guys, those early '80s Bucks teams, and injuries derailed, and both those guys are not in the Hall of Fame. And I think they both very clearly should be in the Hall of Fame, or they both have strong cases for being in the Hall of Fame, right there. But yeah, those were interesting that those guys, on the same teams, basically. Johnson was a couple years before Moncrief, and he got traded really before the injuries happened. Moncrief stayed with Milwaukee, and the injuries zapped some of his strength. Luckily, they had enough talent there, to still be able to keep those teams strong for quite a while. But yeah, it's another guys who unfortunately it's pretty easily explained with the injuries, but it's interesting. The Bucks have a number of those guys who it seems like if you want to be really productive for a period of time and make the Hall of Fame, don't play for the Bucks, because Moncrief, Marcus Johnson, and Bobby Dandridge all are among the top guys who I would say should be in the Hall of Fame and aren't in there for whatever reason.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of shocking that he's not, but again, like I said, that's a guy we've talked about from almost day one of this show. It's just unbelievable how he still hasn't found a way in there, especially the Basketball Hall of Fame, which is like anybody, high school coach wins 1,000 games, it goes in there, but yeah, for some reason he can't get in there, but whatever.
All right, anything else to chat about, Rich?
I think we got it. I think this is good. This is a fun little exercise to do, a little fun thing to explore here, and something that I think a lot of people will enjoy. So yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I had fun doing it.
Cool. Well, everyone, thanks for checking us out. Of course, you can find us at the Step Back at fansided.com. You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We would appreciate a rating and review. It makes us feel good about the work that we do. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.